So once again, happy Friday, everybody. Let's get started like we normally do. Short period of bell meditation. Get into a nice meditation posture wherever you are behind your avatar. And as I ring the Ching bell, the idea, focus on the sound of the bell. Really get that deep listening going so we can all absorb some Dharma today. You'll probably get distracted when it happens. I just want you to gently remind yourself and go back to focusing on the sound of the bell. There'll be a short pause after the short meditation. I'll do the 3 recitations and then on with the talk for today. So give you a moment, get into a nice meditation posture, and we'll begin at the sound of the bell. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. I go for refuge to the Dharma, the teaching. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the taught. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I have taken refuge in the Buddha. I have taken refuge in the Dharma. I have taken refuge in the Sangha. 3 pure precepts. Cease to do harm. Do only good. Do good for others. Bodhisattva vow. However innumerable all beings are, I vow to lead them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Swaha. So today, the subject is acceptance. Well, kind of acceptance and patience and endurance, because they all are kind of in one Dharma basket, if you will. Excuse me. So we start out with the 4 ennobling truths. So the first of the 4 ennobling truths is the realization that life is suffering. And man, are we getting an example of that right now. If this isn't experiential verification that suffering is a human-wide thing, well, I think we're getting a pretty good lesson in it right now. But what the Buddha was teaching with that simple statement was a broad and complex idea. The idea is that the uninformed may take this as an indication that Buddhists passively tolerate suffering. So they take that, 3 words, life is suffering, and they turn it into something that it's not, because it's much more broad than that. So the idea that we passively tolerate suffering is just far from the truth. We are meant to realize that, suffering is unavoidable in the normal course of each human being's lifetime. We're all going to suffer at one point or another. We accept that we will each experience some form of suffering during our life. No matter what strata of society we inhabit, we are not immune to the reality of suffering. And that doesn't matter whether we're talking about physical suffering like starvation or illness, or the mental suffering that comes with disease and poverty, or, in the case of right now, with quarantining and lockdown and all that kind of stuff, social distancing. The Buddha made us aware that none of us can avoid suffering. And then we have ways to practice so we can mitigate and relieve it. Here's where the traditional refinement of acceptance begins, by adjusting our attitudes and our views towards suffering, and doing the same toward periods of not suffering, because we have those too. Thank goodness for that. One must maintain the posture of acceptance when showered with praise and adulation, with as much awareness and effort as we would if we were under the onslaught of abuse, for example. So we want to accept when things are good, but we want to accept when things are health and harmony. It's equanimity that arises from the practices of acceptance and actions. The importance of refining one's ability to accept the realities of impermanence and causality is realized to be as critical to developing positive character traits as any other aspect of the 6 refinements. The traditional views of acceptance and its counterparts, endurance and patience, need to be expanded as an element of personal character development in order to better deal with contemporary issues. And again, the issue we're going through right now, we need to accept it's there, right? We can't deny it, but we also need to accept that it's going to pass, and we know we have to endure it because we don't have any choice, so we might as well learn to be patient, because we don't really know when it's going to end. We hear all kinds of numbers, and politicians and doctors and medical professionals, some of them are throwing dates out there. Well, they don't mean anything, because viruses don't have calendars, so they don't know. When we practice acceptance, just what are we practicing? That's a good question. The traditional definition of the Pali word santi is able to withstand, which reveals a positive character trait, the ability to endure hardship and doubt in order to reach a goal, such as a Buddhist practice, right? Hardship. We do things we might not want to do, and we have things, we bring up things about ourselves maybe we don't want to know. And then there's doubt. Am I doing it right? How long is it going to take? So the texts, the Buddhist texts, speak of refining 3 levels of acceptance. The first is the ability to tolerate personal suffering, whether that be physical or psycho-emotional, that stuff that we cause ourselves. Number 2 is the ability to tolerate physical injury and attacks to the ego perpetrated by others. That whole turn the other cheek thing. Not always easy to do, but we practice it because it's part of acceptance and patience and endurance. And then the third is the ability to tolerate the knowledge that our long-held beliefs and dispositions might not coincide with reality. That's another tough one. What, you mean the world isn't like I want it to be or like I picture it to be? There are also the two attitudes we have to develop alongside of acceptance, and I've already mentioned them a few times, and that's patience and endurance. They all go together. The teaching that I did, I guess last week or the week before, about awareness, acceptance, action, these are the kind of teachings that prepare us for the deeper level of mindfulness needed for a contemporary practice of acceptance. You know, that practice that will work now in the times that we're dealing with. The practitioner must develop an awareness of how they and the world around them really are by working diligently, putting in the effort to strip away the misperceptions found in each one of us. We have them. We have misperceptions, and we have to figure out what they are and deal with them. And further, one must learn to accept how things really are and to accept that transformation or change can happen if you put in the commitment and the effort to do so. But there's another one. Change will happen. That is the cause and effect of actions taken by the self, by others, and by the causal universe itself. So there are questions. We need to ask questions. One question we want to ask is, do we tolerate everything and anything? That's a good question. Another question, does patience and endurance have a limit? How do we decide when and if enough is enough? So the practice of acceptance needs to be viewed through the same lens that we apply to things like generosity and moral and ethical concerns. This is a lens that acknowledges the unique situational aspects that we encounter in life. So I'm going to start out with that first question. Do we tolerate everything and anything? Easy answer is no, we don't. We should not and do not tolerate or accept everything and anything. Acceptance in any of its guises is not passive indifference. You know, that whole idea that we are powerless to affect change, so why try? Or we might choose to set ourselves apart from situations. Like, oh, this is not going to bother me. It doesn't bother me. It's okay. We must accept responsibility and think and act in ways that have the potential to be the cause and effect of positive or wholesome transformation. We've got to be passionate, if you will, in our practice of acceptance so it becomes integral to us achieving moments of enlightenment. There is no compassionate or logical reason to accept or tolerate things like murder, sexism, rape, homophobia, racism, or any type of thoughts that bring about cruelty or acts of violence. So no, we don't accept everything and anything. To mindfully deal with situations that might involve intolerable acts, we practice the 6 refinements and the 4 ennobling truths for the sake of the important goal of human flourishing and the alleviation of discontent, unsatisfactoriness, and anguish. Practicing acceptance does not allow resorting to taking a neutral position. Oh, I don't care. It requires us to recognize the what, when, and how to tolerate or to accept. Note that we must remain non-judgmental of the who, because we are intolerant of action but we show compassion to the individual. That can be difficult. In cases like of pedophilia and other acts of cruelty, this will be difficult. But as Buddhists, we must not act out of anger or revenge or retaliation. And that's what happens when we don't have compassion for the person. This view of acceptance requires a really deep level of mindfulness that we have to apply to each situation in order to make it work. So I want to touch on a couple of the other questions. Does patience and endurance have a limit? Yes. But it's your limit. And if you have a very short limit to it right now, then you need to start practicing how to extend that limit. But there are limits. We're human beings. And I wish I could sit here and tell you what that limit might be of your patience. But I don't know. I don't know what the limit of your endurance might be for something. That's something only you can know, and only you can practice and keep broadening that out as much as you can. And how do we decide when and if enough is enough? Again, it really depends on the situation. You know, if somebody is, and I'm using pedophilia here only as an example, if somebody is talking about abusing children, that's one thing. That may not be enough is enough in some cases. But when they do the act itself, that's when enough becomes enough. And that's just a very broad example. But again, this is something you have to deal with on your own. This is your responsibility to figure out within you when is enough enough. None of this is easy because you have to apply it to each unique situation that might come along rather than have just some blanket answer that you can give somebody. Practiced along with acceptance, the practices of our wisdom, right, developing our wisdom, and our morality and our ethical actions can provide us the skills to determine when to be accepting and how to be accepting. So just like the refinement of generosity, acceptance must be situational in its application. Excuse me, again. Wisdom guides us to viewing the issue in its unique context and to an understanding of what about the situation troubles us, and how an encompassing and corrective solution may be found. So it gives realization that while the situation may be troubling at the time, the ideal of impermanence reminds us that it is transient, that it will pass. Our moral and ethical character will help us view the issue from a place of compassion and loving kindness, even when that is extremely difficult. It also will guide us toward a solution that is more likely to maintain the humanity and the dignity of all the people involved. Again, is this easy? No. Is it a valuable practice? Yes. Rejection, which is the opposite of acceptance, and impatience, which is, of course, the opposite of patience, it takes a lot of energy to maintain these states of being, these emotional contexts, and that's what they are. Rejection and impatience, they are emotional context. And they can leave us little energy to apply to our positive dispositions and those positive actions we'd like to take. It can lead us to resent the situation we find ourselves involved in and lead to a further dimming of our awareness and our ability to find solutions. Rather than approaching an issue with the large mind of compassion and acceptance, we find ourselves instead acting out of our small mind and we become mired in our own ego. So instead, we need to accept how things really are and then use that as the starting point for being a positive agent of change. We must be patient in our resolve and be content to be in the moment we find ourselves in. Excuse me. Contentment, though, doesn't mean that our effort weakens. I'm content with where I am right now, so I don't have to work anymore. No, we continue to remain mindful of what stands in the way of a wholesome result and hold to our conviction to make it happen. Again, we can use the situation we find ourselves in right now as a great example of this. We can find ourselves resenting having to stay in our house for weeks at a time. And the more that we find ourselves resenting it, then we start to forget why we're doing it. That starts to get pushed to the background. And then we stop trying to find ways that maybe we can do better because we find ourselves just mired in our ego and that resentment. But we could choose to think of ourselves more compassionately and think of others more compassionately with loving kindness and think, wait a minute, the reason I'm staying in my house right now is not only so I don't get sick, but also so others don't get sick. So that's going at it with the large mind, instead of the small mind that says things like, oh no, I have the freedom to do whatever I want. Nobody's going to stop me from going out without a mask because this is my freedom to do so. That's the small mind working. So we accept COVID-19, coronavirus, it's a reality. This ain't no joke. It's not a hoax. It's real. And we use that as the starting point for saying, okay, it's real. I accept that. Now what do I do? How can I be a positive agent of change? For example, if they say it's better to wear a mask when you're in public dealing with other people, wear a mask. Don't wait for them to go, it's now a law to wear a mask, but do it because it's the right thing to do. Stay home when you don't need to go out for groceries or something because it's the right thing to do. And find some contentment in the fact that doing it means you stay healthy, others stay healthy, and you set an example. Be mindful that what you're doing will have a wholesome result, and that you can find that contentment even if just in that realization. So the refinement of acceptance begins with the recognition of the not self, that ever-changing, ever-transitioning self. We start with the information that we are a not self, and with practice and experience, we start with the information that we are a self, because that's what we get taught, and with practice and experience, we come to the knowledge of the reality of the not self. Again, that always transforming self. Most people are so firmly grounded in the concept of their selfness, that core of being that they hold so tightly to, that getting past it to the ideal of the not self is really difficult to accept. There can be a basic understanding of the philosophy, and you might even get some really brief little insights into the truth of the not self. But it does take commitment and effort to reach an encompassing grounding in that ideal. So until that moment of enlightenment arises, one must accept the truth of the Dharma, have some faith in the Dharma in this regard. What we practice then is called Dharma Santi, which just means acceptance of the Dharma, patient acceptance of the teachings about the nature of reality, even though they are not yet within your grasp. In this day and time, that's kind of a Buddhist roundabout way of saying, accept what you're being told by the experts and people you can trust, even though you might not have experienced it. Like, I have not experienced coronavirus. I feel very fortunate in that so far. Right? My family's okay, my extended family's okay so far. So the reality of the coronavirus really isn't in my grasp yet. But I know it's real. And that's kind of Dharma Santi, right? Dharma being just reality and Santi being acceptance. So, like so much of Buddhist practice, acceptance begins as an individual effort that evolves into a community effort, so that the virtue of acting with acceptance and patience and endurance becomes an encompassing and corrective virtue practiced by all. But let's be serious, more like practiced by a lot of people. It'd be very difficult for us to get to the all. So this is just another example of how our Buddhist practice has relevance no matter what we're dealing with in life. And right now, dealing with the coronavirus, acceptance, patience, and endurance is critical to you getting through this and having some level of contentment, to having some level of acceptance that this will pass. And as I've said over and over, it will suck for a while, but it will pass. Is it going to change things after this? Yeah. But welcome to the human world, right? Things are always changing. That's what impermanence is all about. So use this time in a productive way and think about, do you accept what's going on as a reality so you can actually deal with it? Can you find the patience both for yourself, for others, and for the situation in order to not drive yourself into anguish and discontent and suffering? And can you find the means to endure this? Because that's what we have to do. And it takes commitment, and it takes effort, and it takes a little wisdom in order to do that. But I think we can all do it. You know, most of you, I know you've been practicing for a while. This is not new to you. This situation is new. So we have to figure out unique responses to this unique situation, always with the intent to promote human flourishing and the alleviation of suffering. And we can do it. If you find yourself at odds, drop me an email. Talk to one of the other Sangha members. Talk to family and friends. But do it over Skype or FaceTime or something. Try not to do it face to face too much.